How's it going? And welcome to episode 172 of On the Wire. Proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You could follow me at 80 grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin Hasting can be followed at Hasting Kevin. And we have a great show lined up for you. But before we get into all that, Kevin, I'm just happy to have you back here in front of me. How's the house looking?
Well, it's got a lot of holes in it, Adam, but everything went great. As I was just telling you before we were getting started, I am so happy to be here instead of doing that, repiping the total house. Everything went smoothly. We're getting water everywhere we want water and not anywhere we don't want water. And it worked out well. Shout out to listener of our show, good friend of mine, Aaron Perez, who came from the mainland, spent a week here, and we didn't hit a beach. We did hit some bars, but we had a good time, even though we were working the entire week he was here. So shout out to him for coming to help me out with that.
Excellent. Good. Yes. Good move there. Good move all around. I'm happy to hear you said it right before. And I'm glad you used that same line. You got water going everywhere you want it to go and nowhere
exactly.
You don't. That is the goal, and you nailed it. There you go. But all right, so happy you're back. Let's get right into it then, because that's why we're here, and we'll just keep it good times rolling. Got quite a bit of little news to consider as we get closer and closer to the All-Star break. As we know, we are a little bit further than halfway through the season. All-Star break is that figurative halfway mark. Let you take a breath, but there's still action to be done. There are still, there's still Faab to run, and there are still games to be played after said Faab run. So some things to consider as we are making those bids here. We'll go the big addition last week, of course, was James Wood in Washington. So we'll stay in Washington with another addition to be considered, probably not anywhere close to the same level as James Wood, but Jackson Rutledge, he's already made his debut for Washington. He comes back. He started for Washington this week. Assuming that, he doesn't get sent right back down after the break, or he finds a way to kind of weasel his way into that rotation. Is there something of interest here with Jackson Rutledge, a former prospect of note, still in some circles, still a prospect of note. But for a team like Washington, if somebody like this is going to get the opportunity, are you still at least taking note?
I am taking note. I am a little worried that he might not stay in the rotation long and maybe get sent back down. It really depends on what Washington decides they want to do going forward. They have flat out told us that in spite of giving up 4 or 5 runs in his most recent start, that DJ Hers, that this is an attempt to limit his innings, and that we will see him back again after the break. They have an off day in that first full week after the break, and they can get all the way to July 28th without needing a 5th starter. If they do indeed choose to go that route, I think it will be DJ Hers. I think it'll be DJ Hers, even if they don't want to skip that spot, because he's eligible to return on the 23rd. They don't need their 5th starter till the 24th without skipping a turn of the 5th starter in the rotation. So I really think DJ Hers is going to be back right away. The question is, would they finally, Washington's winning a few more games than we expected. They are one of the teams that we talked about in the offseason we thought could be better than people expected. That has come to fruition. Not that they're world beaters, but there's a lot of fantasy potential here. And do they want to sell tickets? Do they want to try to win a few more games? What I'm getting at is Patrick Corbin. Right. Are they going to let Rutledge stay? I think that's the spot we're looking at here, because I think Hers comes back. So I think it's a big question mark of whether we see Rutledge going forward. maybe worth $1 or 2 to spec on him sticking in the rotation, but I really think we're gonna see DJ Hurst back, uh, as soon as they need a 5th starter. The question becomes, what's Washington really want to do in the second half of this season? Do they want to try to fill some seats? Obviously, James Wood you spoke of, and the lineup performing with CJ Abrams and Jesse Winker out here having a season stealing bases for us.
Another home run today.
Luis Garcia Jr., do are they going to try to drum up some fan interest going into 2025, I think is the question. So I don't know that they will do that with somebody that's been around as long and actually and it contributed as much to this team as Patrick Corbin has. So I kind of doubt we see him regularly, but he'll get his spot starts. So to answer your question, is he worth monitoring? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, he looked fine today in his start today. Ended up
Yeah.
just shy of the 5 inning mark. Got pulled at 4 2/3, led up 2 earned runs, walked 2, let up 3 hits, struck out. So I mean, just the stat line along the box score is perfectly adequate. If you actually streamed him for this week in one of the daily moves, or you had the presence in one of your drafts and holds or something like that, you feel okay about it for sure. Was it enough to hold him into that rotation spot after the break? Obviously we'll have to wait and see. I think it's one of those fun situations where it's if you've got the spot, go ahead and throw a buck, throw $2 even.
Exactly.
And if you get lucky and he starts another game, I haven't looked to see what Washington's schedule looks like out of the break. But that'll be something that obviously you need to consider moving forward too. So if you do get lucky, he does start. If those matchups are looking good, then it'll be something that you're happy.
Well, this is what I had looked at earlier is if they do not skip the 5th starter, he would pitch probably Wednesday of the full week after the All-Star break at home against the Padres. If they do skip that spot, he would end up pitching over the weekend at St. Louis. St. Louis been really bad on a yearly basis, had come around for quite some time. There for about a 30-day period recently, they were one of the best offenses in baseball, but they've slowed back down again. So I'd much rather see him get skipped and then get that start at St. Louis than have to face the Padres that their offense has come around recently.
Yeah, I mean, and you never know exactly how a team is going to put their rotation together after the All-Star break as well. We'll get to one of those examples later on the show. But we'll have to wait
Any of
and
those.
see. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. It doesn't just because you've had all this rest doesn't mean your SP1 is going on on that first day back. So
Right.
the order is definitely not set in stone.
And to your point, if you have room, this is the weekend to grab him because if we get news that he's pitching at St. Louis the following weekend, he'll cost much more next week.
Yeah, sure. All right, well, let's move over to the West Coast here as the Oakland Athletics throw Tyler Soderstrom to the IL with a bone bruise in his left wrist. I feel like there's been a lot of hand and wrist injuries this
Oh yeah.
season, mostly obviously being hit in the hand or wrist. Most of them have been kind of scares that have been like, okay, fine, you're fine, but then obviously you have the big one like Mookie Betts been out for quite some time, but a couple other ones. Anyway, I digress. Tyler Soderstrom is on the IL with a bone bruise in his left wrist. In return, the Oakland Athletics brought back Seth Brown. What is Seth Brown's role going to be with the A's, and is there a road to relevancy once again for Mr. Brown?
In deep leagues, I think there is a road to relevancy for Seth Brown. He's going to be the strong side of a platoon. We probably don't see him versus lefties. That does make it difficult with a 4-day break, trying to figure out the pitching rotations as we were just talking going forward. But he's going to be on the strong side of a platoon until we see Soderstrom back at first base. Projections, I think, kind of like him here. And kind of, because yes, he's projected for a 220-ish batting average going forward. That's much better than the 191 he's got right now, and right in line with his 222, 230, 214 the past 3 seasons. And that they're a little bullish on the power that we haven't really seen. Only 5 home runs in 199 plate appearances. They're more on the pace of 3 or 4 home runs in about 75 plate appearances. So more along the lines of being a 20 to 25 home run hitter rather than the pace he's showed us so far
Sure.
this season. And in spite of the higher strikeout rate, he has performed a little better recently. And the projections have his strikeout rate dropping down, not back down to what is done the last couple of seasons, around 26%, but getting near that 27, 28% instead of the 33% we've seen so far this season as a whole. As I said, it's been a little better recently. So in deep leagues, strong side of a platoon, we know he's got power. We know he can surprise us with stolen bases here and there once in a while. He's got 4 on the year. He gave us 11 in 2022. So, yeah, in deep leagues, he's not going to be at the top of my list, but he's playable in spots where you need a corner and somebody that's going to be in the lineup and provide the runs and RBI that we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, if that strong side platoon hold up with any kind of consistency, I know, like you just said, we don't know exactly what the rotations are going to look like out of the break, but just looking at the options that the Angels and the Astros have, each one only has one lefty in their rotation
Right.
as it's expected to be constructed. Tyler Anderson and Hunter Brown, respectively. So maybe he gets unlucky and they get one of those guys in each one of those series. There's 2 off days. More likely, he probably only hits one of them. So a lot of righties, what I'm saying, a lot of righties expected in those first 2 series out of the gate for the Oakland Athletics and Seth Brown. Going over to Detroit, Kenta Maeda. I talk about the road to relevancy with Seth Brown. He's kind of moving away from that. He has been for some time now, but now he's moving to his move now is to the bullpen for what AJ Hinch says is to be, quote, foreseeable future. Is there any world in which this actually makes him more relevant or more valuable? Can he carve out a role and become one of the guys we talk about in our ratios category, pitching in the shorter stints? Maybe he's more than 1 inning. Maybe it's just like if you can get through the order one time. So maybe it's 1 and change. Maybe it's 2 full innings. If he can actually get things going in the right direction, does this make you more or less, or plateaued interest level in Kenta Maeda?
Well, I think there is a chance that he becomes more valuable to our fantasy teams. I don't necessarily think it's likely, but there's a chance. I want to see what his velocity looks like when he knows he's only throwing
Right.
an inning or 2 or even 3. That's what I want to see. So hopefully we see him over the weekend and get an idea of that. With Scooble and the way Flaherty's been going, that's 2 of but only the 4 starting pitchers listed for Detroit on roster resource right now. So that's 2 guys we're probably not going to see him coming in before the end of the 5th inning. most of their starts, but the rest of that rotation, that's what we're looking for, right? I think with Maeda, we're not looking for a setup guy that might vulture saves. We're looking
Right.
at if he can dial it up because he's only going an inning or two, and he's that first guy out of the pen when guys don't make it five or can't go five or the team doesn't want them to go five.
There it is.
That is something I would be interested in, but it will start with seeing what his velocity looks like when he knows he's not, he's started every appearance that he's made this year, even though many of them have only been 2, 3, 4 innings. We want to see what he looks like when he knows that's all the longer he's going to be in the game. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on it, but it's not likely.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting situation. You're right. It is not somebody we're looking at the vulture saves, but there's a possibility he could vulture wins in the right
Exactly.
circumstance, even with Detroit. You're gonna want to take care of the Tarek Skubals of the world. Even we don't know what lies ahead for Jack Flaherty as far as what uniform he'll be wearing in a month time. Maybe the opportunity does arrive to put Maeda back in the rotation out of pure just necessity or just not having the bodies to fill. But I'll be curious to see how that's exactly where my mind was going, is knowing that he has a limitation. He's not trying to stretch out to 5 innings. He's only going one, maybe 2 innings. Let's see what you still got, and let's just ramp it up as best we can in those situations. All right, we'll go over to Chicago here as Cody Bellinger hits the IL, and then the Cubs bring back up Alexander Canario. Uh, I mean, this is both, concerning for in the Bellinger's camp. This is, multiple times already he's hit the IL or been injured in some capacity for the Cubs. More than likely also going to run him, into that period where the no man's land period of the trade deadline, where the Cubs don't know what they're doing, what they want to do. Um, and he kind of handcuffs the situation by being injured. So more than likely, I would assume Bellinger will still be a Cub by this time next month, just due to this. Um, so, I mean, is there a concern holding on to Bellinger for the rest of the season with this kind of an injury? And is Canario going to actually, be given an opportunity to kind of fill those shoes, or is it just a situation where they just need another, they need a 26th man?
I think Canario's short side of platoon here. I know he just got called up. We don't know if he was actually available on the first day, but two games since he's been recalled, he's not in the lineup, both against right-handed starting pitching. I think he's going to be short side of platoon here with Pete Crow Armstrong, is what it's looking like to me. And in that case, unless it's a pickup for a half of a week, typically in NFBC formats where we know the Cubs will be facing more lefties than typically, then there's just not going to be enough playing time there, unfortunately.
Yeah, that it seemed like, I mean, it's a great name to see come back up, and I'd like to, kind of see what he can continue to do. But it did not seem like it was going to be a 1-for-1, like somebody who's going to come up and just take all of the one player's playing time that they were going to take over. So, obviously a name we all kind of want to keep an eye on, but if you're not going to get that playing time, we luckily for us, we record this on Friday. We got another 2 days to kind of see where the Cubs are at and what they're going to do with them before we have to place bids. But I guess I'm more interested. I'm even more worried on the Bellinger front. From what I understand, it shouldn't be like a major injury, but the fact that it continues to be an issue for him this season. He's not lighting the world on fire, but he's not doing poorly either. Um, he's being helpful in the leagues in which you do roster him. We'll get into this a little bit later on the pod as far as like, these kind of difficult drops that you have to make or you have to consider making at this point. Are you at that point with Bellinger now, or are we still holding on to him?
As we're going to talk when we dive into this a little bit later, It is so league dependent, and that sounds like a cop out, but it really is. There is such a drastic difference from league to league in who's available in the player pool, position by position, category need by category need. I think in most instances, I'm trying to hold Bellinger if I can, at least till I get a little more news, especially in 15-team leagues. In 12s, it's one of those situations where he's my last drop, but if I need the spot, unfortunately, I'll go ahead and make that move.
All right. Yeah, like you said, we'll get into that a little bit later on. So that's called a tease where we come from. And where else we come from and where we're going is gonna be talking about more injury concerns, some options, and some DFAs. And we're gonna talk about those items right after this break. All right, going back up to north of the border, Kevin Bo Bichette injured his right calf on Wednesday. He's out of the lineup again today as we're recording this on Friday. Has not hit the IL, but this is the same calf. He did spend a stint of IL nursing that calf last month. Spent the minimum, just 10 days on there, but still concerning that it is the same calf. Are we extra concerned about this situation because it's the same body part, the same injury that he just sustained? And what are we expecting? I mean, Toronto seems to have so many moving parts, especially in that infield right now. Even when guys go down, then they lose options like Orelvis Martinez going down for basically the rest of the season, and then other injuries. It just seems like the IKF going on the IL as well. It just seems like they've got a lot of moving parts that can kind of go in and out. It doesn't seem like it's an obvious fit for somebody to kind of come in and take all that playing time. So what are you looking at as far as the Toronto, especially their infield right now, if Bichette were to miss a little bit of extra time?
Well, it is a little concerning that it is the same body part. And I believe it was Van and Steve on this week's Wins Above Fantasy talked about, yes, it's the same calf, but it is a different injury. That I get that it's still concerning because when I joined Sarah Sanchez and Shelley Vergestrate a few weeks ago. Bo Bichette was one of the topics that came up on our fantasy feud, and I at the time I said I was worried about Bo Bichette, and my biggest thing that I was worried about didn't have to do with his injury, didn't have to do with the stat line results. It had to do with he is not pulling the ball at all, like zero. You looked at his spray chart at that time. I think he had one hit that was pulled. It was absolutely crazy. Everything is going the other way, which is great when guys are spraying the ball around the field, but when you can't pull the ball at all, that's a big issue. And I really wonder if the calf injury had a lot to do with that. And if so, now that the same calf is re-injured, even if it's a completely different injury, is that going to affect this even more? Is this what we're going to see the rest of the season from Bo Bichette? A spray, slap hitter, no power, and no stolen base attempts. That's not what we drafted him for.
No, not
Now,
at all.
with that said, 2 weeks ago, I had the one online championship league where Bo Bichette had been dropped. He was listed as 100% rostered, but he was available in my league. And I did put in what I thought was a keep him honest bid, and it was way too much.
No,
I think I bid about $65, assuming he would go for triple digits, and the backup bid was 13. This is the type of guy that uh, it depends on team, as I briefly alluded to earlier with all of these guys at this point in the season. But it's a team that I have that's like mid pack, and I need a spark, right? And getting my weekly streamers in that spot probably isn't going to be enough. I need to make a bigger move than that. So a guy like Bo Bichette, could just flip a switch after the All-Star break.
Sure.
So in my opinion, it's worth a shot in situations like that. Bo Bichette isn't available in a lot of leagues. So your question, what's this do to Toronto's infield? I think we see Davis Schneider probably a little more often. We did see him versus a righty on Thursday out of the lineup again on Friday versus a righty, but Leo Jimenez is in there. So I think we're going to see him shuffle things around. And I believe Toronto is expecting Bo Bichette back shortly after the break, if not immediately. And hopefully that calf heals because I really think that's got a lot to do with what has gone on with him this season. And it's just a simple fact that he is not pulling the ball at all, ever.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just a combination of injury, if he's just late on all these hits, and he's just kind of forcing. You're basically doing what I do in slow pitch softball, and you just wait, and then just try to dink it over the first baseman's head for a triple, which I've done plenty of times. So I wonder if it's more of the mechanics of like just not being able to get the bat around fast enough, making the decisions a little
That's
bit
what I'm
later.
afraid of.
And then yeah, that's a lot harder to thing to fix than simply a calf injury that you can just let heal over time. But we still got little less than half the season to find out. We'll throw this out here. I don't know if there's really much to say on here, but I'm in Toronto. Might as well throw it out. Kevin Kiermaier, he was put on revocable waivers by Toronto. He cleared the waivers earlier today, so he will stay a Blue Jay for the time being. Um, you know, is this just a simple sign that the Blue Jays are already willing to like just kind of throw parts out and become either maybe a little bit sellers at the deadline, and we should be expecting other names to follow suit, maybe bigger names that can make it more of a difference, or is this just just kind of dead weight that they were allowing Kiermaier to go off and maybe get picked up by more of a contender situation?
I think it's a little bit of all of that. I think there's a chance Toronto ends up selling. I mean, they're not out of it by any means at this point, but when you look at the teams that are above them, and including your Boston Red Sox, one of the hottest teams in baseball recently,
Doing
and all of a
okay,
sudden,
doing okay.
Yankees fans are paying attention to what Boston's doing here. They're closing ground pretty quickly. So, yeah, I think when you have Baltimore and the New York Yankees that, in spite of a 3-week slump, are still well ahead of them, and Boston playing the way they are, that makes a difference, other than just how many games back are we out of a postseason spot. So I could see this happening. Somebody will pick up Kiermaier due to his defense, due to his speed, and then we'll be talking about him in the stolen base category if it's with a team that we think he's going to get some opportunities with.
Yeah, I mean, just probably just a little too early for somebody to kind of make that commitment or that pickup at this point. But I think you're right. I think he goes back on waivers or gets DFA'd or something happens before the deadline,
Mhm.
or he gets tacked on to another deal. He will be playing somewhere else by this time next month. Somebody who we already know will be playing somewhere else later on this month is unfortunately Bobby Miller. He was optioned to Triple A, so he'll be playing in Triple A, still playing for the Dodgers franchise. But he'll be opening the second half with Triple A squad in Oklahoma City. No timetable as to when he will rejoin the Dodgers themselves. So, how tight should we be holding on to Bobby Miller in our redraft leagues, or are you expecting to see him on the drop list in this week's Fab?
I'm sure there will be a couple of aggressive drops, but it's tough. And it's also tough to hold him because we just have no idea. Well, we know he's been really bad. We know he's banged up recently, but even when he wasn't, he was really bad. Uh, DVR and Eno Saris and Trevor May were talking on Rates and Barrels this week about this. They were talking about him compared to Hunter Brown earlier this season, and this really made sense to me. Hunter
Sure.
Brown was really bad. kind of tweak that two-seamer so he could throw it more often, all of a sudden he's great. Bobby Miller needs to make an adjustment like that. Can he do it in season like Hunter Brown just did? We have no idea. But, most people that drafted him in 15-team leagues, he's probably your number 2. In some 12s, he could be your 3 even. And some 15s early in draft season, you could probably have gotten him as a 3. This is tough. I think this is one of the situations where I'm holding as long as I can, but unless we start to hear something imminent of a return, I would have to make that drop if I really need the spot.
Yeah, I mean that phrase you use, it's going to come up again, I'm sure. But you hold as long as you can. I guess my question is like, what? Like we're more than halfway through the season. How the reasons you can't hold on to somebody change as the season progresses.
Yes.
Like at first, the reason you can't hold somebody is because you have too many guys you have to hold on to. Like there's too many guys injured. There's too many guys, whatever. As time goes on, I think the reason you can't hold on to somebody for that long is just the need for having constant rotation of the players on your bench in your starting lineup, and other teams are doing that too. So if you're not doing that, then if you're not able to do that, you're missing out on those darts, on the streams, on the things that you could possibly be helping really chip away at the categories that you need to. And if you're really handcuffing yourself in the second half of the season by holding on to somebody you don't know, you're really, it's just a different beast in the second half than it is in the first half when it comes to stashing guys, because there's not as much time to make up in that. Again, we're teasing this whole middle part of the show a little too much. I think we're gonna just kind of spread it all around.
Yeah,
um
and also, you make a great point. A great point about that things change throughout the season. And when I say hold them as long as you can, earlier in the season, yeah, that would have meant a couple other guys injured, a minor league stash.
mhm,
At this point in the season, the first thing I'm looking at with my bench is coverage for the weekend. If anybody gets hurt in the first half of the week, can I replace them for the weekend?
exactly,
That's number
sure.
1, which means that as long as I can isn't as long as it was a
Right,
few
yeah,
weeks
exactly.
ago.
Could be 4 days, not four
Right.
weeks.
Yep.
All right, let's see. Another cut that was made going to Philadelphia here is your boy Whit Merrifield. He was straight out released by the Philadelphia Phillies. Is there anything left here in the tank? It's not as though he was, again, doing anything of note with the Phillies. It was never expected he was going to be doing anything of note with the Phillies based on what he had done the year prior, based on the role that he signed up for. But is there a place that is there a place that he could latch on to for the second half of the season where he could actually be, again, that road to relevancy? Could he drive on it once again?
Probably not. Now, the stolen bases, there'll still be a few of them there, but I anticipate that a team in contention will grab Whit Merrifield as a utility player because he can play all over the infield and outfield and can steal some bases, has in the past hit for average. He's not now. We know that. He's not the same guy he was, but he can still be valuable to a contending team. I'll be much more interested in fantasy if in the offseason he signs with a bad team. I want him in Nicky Lopez's spot with the White Sox, or right. I want him
Sure.
leading off for Oakland. That's where I want to see him if I'm going to have him on my fantasy team. I'm afraid he's probably going to go to a contender. And for real baseball purposes, he can be very valuable to them,
Sure.
but he's not going to give
Veteran
us much for our fantasy teams if that's the
veteran
case.
veteran presence, gap filler, whatever term you
You're
want to
muted.
use. I am not muted. That is a lie. Am I really muted?
Still.
How about now? All right, let's figure this out. Okay. Hello. Saying it's picking me up.
It was me. My earphones fell out.
It happens. But yeah, I figured that he becomes a.
But I don't think your mic's on, actually.
Oh goodness. No, it is. It's totally on.
Okay.
You can hear me though.
I can hear you now, but it sounds like your computer mic now.
Oh, I.
Sorry, Uncle Ted, and anybody else out there that's listening right now. It's all my fault. I started it.
Saying that it's my cue to you. I'm gonna trust it for now. All right. Anyway, what I was trying to say is that bringing him on as a veteran presence, as a gap filler, as whatever term you want to throw in there for that type of role is totally in the cards for Whit Merrifield moving forward. Doesn't do much for my fantasy teams except in a DFS style situation, maybe. We got a couple returnees to their respective major league teams. Brian Wu, you know what? We'll skip Brian Wu because he's starting right now, so I give him maybe another couple outs before we have to talk about him to see how he's doing. But he did return to the Seattle rotation starting on Friday. Xander Bogaerts is the other one of note. Lucas and I talked quite a bit about him last week, as it was just kind of a surprise / shock to see him come back so quickly. When I think most of us kind of expected, end of July at the earliest, broken shoulder for whatever whatever that's worth. But he returned, batting fifth for the Padres. Started at second base on Friday. I haven't seen his stat line if that game has been underway for a good 20 minutes. What kind of situation are you expecting to see? Are you expecting him to? I mean, Xander Bogaerts is somebody who plays every day, whenever possible. San Diego going into the season had a very what looked like solid infield. You knew exactly who was playing, where they were playing, how often they were going to play. Obviously, with a couple of injuries to a couple of different players throughout, that's kind of changed. But now that they're kind of got the game back together, are you expecting to kind of see that moving forward, or is it going to? What's your expectation now for the infield for the San Diego Padres?
I really hope Bogaerts didn't come back too quickly, and I want to believe he didn't, or they wouldn't let him come back this quickly. We've heard over the past couple of seasons he's been publicly acknowledged that he gets cortisone shots each year in his wrist, and that's what gets him through the season. And I just hope he didn't come back too quickly, because this offense has been putting up runs. Jackson Merrill's been great. We've been talking about Jerks and Profar all season. Arias is doing Arias things, got his average back up above 300 again, like we expect. So I have Xander Bogaerts on a lot of teams and held him on every one of them. So I'm biased here. I'm really hoping this works out. Hope he's not back too early. And as far as the rest of the infield, they were really piecing things together quite a bit. We've seen Cronenworth at first base a lot. We've just seen all kinds of different lineups with them. For the most part, Cronenworth had been playing second base while Bogaerts was out. Now he's back to first base on Friday, Bogaerts' first game back, and Luis Arias is the designated hitter. The regular designated hitter, they didn't really have one. We've seen Manny Machado in and out of that. He's getting healthier, so hopefully that's not a concern. We've seen Donovan Solano. That's probably the biggest hit. Donovan Solano has been my coverage for the weekend because of all the positions he's eligible at. He's
Sure.
been somebody on many of my rosters that I would use for my weekend coverage if I needed somebody. And he might be taking the biggest hit here, unfortunately, now that Machado is playing third base. Arias going to DH once in a while with Cronenworth at first and Bogart's back. So, unfortunately, we may be losing that little safety blanket we had for a few weeks with Donovan Solano. That's probably the biggest impact here, other than whatever Xander Bogarts can do himself.
Yeah, and like you let off with, he's going to be the one that's like, I will go out there every single day, regardless of how my wrist feels, my shoulder feels, whatever. And until literally I break something, I'm going to stay out there. You're going to have to take me out on a stretcher type of situation, which they had to do earlier this season, figuratively. So we'll see how that holds up throughout the. And, luckily for him, it's nice that they brought him back. It before it's like this is why I don't think he actually came back too early, is because they brought him back for one series before the All-Star break, where he's going to get 4 more days off before their next series. And if it was too early, you just skip that series. Just it's one series. You can stretch it out, and you get a whole week off. And so I'm confident, I guess, that because of the situation, the timing, that it kind of worked out in their favor, or in his favor.
I agree. And one last point for the last couple of weeks, he's been a very popular ad. Oh, as we started to hear that he was coming back a little early, and he is 100% rostered in main events, but only 89% in online championships. So there's some 12-team leagues out there where he's available. So check.
There
Take
you go.
that 1 second to check and see if he's available.
Always check. All right, and we're going to be checking in with a couple of tough drops that I think we need to start asking questions to ourselves about. And we're going to do that right after this quick break. All right, we are back. Of course, you are still listening to On the Wire. We just went over a whole bunch of news items that should be on your mind when considering your Faab bids for the Sunday. But of course, a whole bunch of other stuff happened. And you should be listening to the First Pitch podcast with Casey Bubba and Jay Crumpler on the weekends. They break down all the news, highlights, and observations from every day's worth of games, as well as looking ahead at each slate to keep you up to date with everything you need to know to win your fantasy league all season and all summer long. Of course, you've got Nick Pollock's Plus Pitch podcast. He's been traveling this week, been a little spotty, but he'll be back stronger than ever next week. So keep an eye out for the Plus Pitch podcast, where he highlights every starting pitching performance from the day prior and looking ahead at the next day's streaming options that might be on your wire. All right, Kevin, we keep teasing it, but I wanted to talk to you about and get your take on a couple of guys that ultimately, at this point in the season, I think probably have a little bit of a higher rostership percentage than I expected. I was really focused on 12-teamers because, well, for many reasons, but mostly when we're talking about 12-teamers and shallower formats, you have a lot more flexibility because there are less teams, there are less players being rostered, so you have more options on the wire. And so I thought that these percentages, given these types of players and where they're sitting at, were a little higher. I expected them to be a little bit lower at this point. I'm expecting them to go down. But there's a certain point where I wonder, especially with this first group, why it takes so long for their percentages to go down. And so the first grouping of players that I've got for you, and if you've got more names, please throw it out there, are these injury guys. And a lot of the guys we talked about, I brought it up with Cody Bellinger's situation. But these guys have been injured for a while, or two of them have been. One of them has been, I guess, healthy, if he can ever be considered healthy, 100%. And that is Eloy Jimenez, by the way. Max Muncy and Starling Marte aren't expected to be back anytime soon. There's been like radio silence on Marte. And Max Muncy, Dave Roberts literally just came out and said there's been no progress on Max Muncy. He's come out, Muncy himself has come out verbally saying how frustrated he is with his rehabilitation process and how his body is just not getting to where it needs to be, and it's taking forever. Or as my kids will say, because they watch way too much Bluey, it's taking for ages. It's hard to see him coming back before the trade deadline, is what David Roberts said. So that's at least a month away from now. We're probably thereabouts. So why are we holding these injured players so tightly, especially in these 12 teamers? Marte's been having a decent season before the injury. Don't get me wrong. I have him rostered in a couple places. Muncy, same thing, but with no end in sight. And this hasn't changed. This hasn't been different. Like when Marte got hurt originally, we knew it was going to be a long time. Muncy, we saw it happen, last year. We've seen it happen most seasons with him. And when he came out the first time saying, this is taking forever, and like I don't know what's going on. It's just I got nothing. At this point, shouldn't that have been the first red flag that said, you know what, I need this roster spot. I need to start turning. These guys aren't 100% roster. Don't get me wrong. Muncy's 59%, Starling Marte 60%, and these are in online championships, 12 teamers in the NFBC platform. What's your overall take on why that rostership is still over 50%?
I get it with Starling Marte because we were told 4 weeks, and we were told that about 2 weeks ago. So I'm still hopeful. We haven't got much news since. 4 weeks for a guy that was on pace to be like a 15-25 guy with plenty of runs and RBI and a good batting average. He was contributing in 5 categories. 4 weeks, I'm okay with. Still hoping for that 4 weeks. If I hear of a setback, then I probably am cutting him free. Definitely in 12s, cutting him loose. If we hear of a setback, but I think we're still going by that 4 weeks that we were told. Max Muncy, when I hear at least August, he didn't say August 1st. He said it's going to be at least till August. So what I hear is probably September. So that's an easy cut for me. And we didn't necessarily hear that till today. Sure. So I understand people holding him, but after today's news, I think that will trigger a lot of drops this weekend for Max Muncy. Eloy Jimenez, I mean, he's been back with the team. Sure, he's been on and off the IL back and forth, but recently he's been back, and he only played 1 game of a doubleheader. A lot of guys do that, but he's not performing. And I just think it's the culmination of all these injuries we've seen him have throughout his career. I don't know if we're ever going to see a good, healthy Eloy Jimenez for a season, and that's very unfortunate. But the lack of performance is more of an issue with Jimenez. Even in some 15-team leagues, I think you probably have 5 outfielders and a UT spot, 6 players better than Eloy Jimenez. So I think that number, that rostership percentage will drop as well. Marte is the one I'm still holding out hope for on the teams where I drafted him, which was quite a few. I have several shares of Marte.
Yeah, I mean, I think Uncle Ted says it pretty well in the chat. Like, I wonder how much of it will be the Mets kind of stretching this out and making sure that we have a healthy Starling Marte.
That's a great point.
Most of August and go into September. The Mets has been a team that we've half joked about not being the best about bringing back their injured players in the right frame. Like bringing them back too early, not having a good rehabilitation process to make sure that when they do come back, they are 100% ready to go. So I wonder if they've either been told that, they've realized that, and they're making, they'll make good on that this year, at least at the example of Marte and anybody else. And this is the time of year where, you can kind of get away with that, especially when you have Grimace on your side. I guess they're going to be okay. Now, those are a couple of hitters, and they're injury related drops or holds or whatever, however you're kind of thinking about them. Um, I got a couple pitchers here, and I'm curious to know your take as far as if there are other pitchers that I'm missing. But these guys were all kind of lumped together on the rostership page as I was looking at them, so they all stood out not only based on their rostership percentage, but just based on overall production. Um, the names I'm going to throw out here are Jordan Montgomery, Lance Lynn, and James Paxton. Nobody, at least after the month of April, I expected to kind of see as stalwarts on your roster. Like they need to be on your roster. They need to stay based on their production. It was all, for me, just seeing this, it's all name value. It's just the value of the name. You're like, all right, maybe this is the guy who can turn it around right away. Maybe it's somebody with the right matchup, yada, yada, yada. But when you're really coming down to it, if you're playing fantasy baseball based on the numbers and not on the names, like, why are these guys rostered so highly? These guys, 70% for Montgomery, 67% in Lance Lynn, 76% for James Paxton, and these are 12 teamers. Like, I don't know. I mean, and a lot of them are stashes, or at least this week, because based on the percentages that I'm seeing, Montgomery's 22% started this week. Lance Lynn's 39% started this week, and Paxton was started in 48. So, almost half the leagues. And this is not 48% of the leagues that own. These are 48% of leagues in general of OCs. So he's being started in most places that he is rostered, at least this past week. But these aren't guys that I need to start every week, and I don't know that I need to stash them every week in order to wait for the next best matchup at this time of year when we're starting to see more options kind of peek through. We talk about how difficult it has been to stream pitchers in general, but this is typically that time of year right around or right after the All-Star break. We start seeing some guys get called up. We start seeing some injuries kind of make their way through the system, and more guys return. And more streaming options do start appearing around this time of year. Overall thoughts on these three guys and anybody else that kind of stands out as you don't need to hold on to these guys. And tell me I'm wrong too. Like if there's something about these three guys that I'm not seeing, then call me out on that for sure.
No, this is something that we briefly discussed right before we hit that record button, and I told you this was an amazing set of three players. These are three pitchers that recently I have added in 12-team leagues, and also I have dropped each one of these three guys in 15-team leagues recently. That's how league dependent this is. James Paxton right now is the number one starter for the Los Angeles Dodgers. That has value. Now, I I don't mean this to be a victory lap. It is kind of, but that's not my intent. But a couple of weeks ago, I was worried about James Paxton for his two-step because the both teams he was facing, while they appeared to be really good matchups on the surface, if you look a little closer, they had both been hitting left-handed pitching really good recently. And he went out and threw 5 scoreless innings in the first with like 6 strikeouts, didn't get the win. And I was just like, oh man, if he pitches good this weekend, I'm going to feel so bad. I steered people astray. And if he goes out and gets a win to add on to those 5 scoreless innings and 6 strikeouts, and he goes out and gives up 9 runs in that second start, and I was worried about that. That's the problem with James Paxton, and it's really about paying attention about matchups. He's been good for much of this season, but teams that have been recently hitting left-handers well, I'm avoiding with James Paxton. In spite of him being the number one starter for the Los Angeles Dodgers right now, which once again has a lot of value, in the right matchups. So that's the one I probably understand the most for the higher rostership percentage. They're at 76% in 12-team leagues. Jordan Montgomery has had me pulling my hair out, all of it that I have all season long. It feels like he's on my bench when he goes out and shows us what he can do, and he's in my lineup when he's not performing well.
Just how
And to your point, I think the answer is just get him off my roster so I don't have that headache. I think that's the answer. Just let him go. And other people are going to do the same thing. So if there is a complete turnaround, sure, it will cost me some fab, but I can get him back if I want to. Lance Lynn is only for me in the best of matchups, that handful, 4 or 5 teams that we like to pick on, is really the only reason I would roster Lance Lynn for a week, because he's been so up and down as well. And we know it's age, velocity, all of that's tying together. It's all catching up with him. But in the right matchups, I can see it, but 67%, probably not what I would expect for a 12-team rostership to be either, to your point. So, yeah, I agree. In most cases, I could let any of these 3 guys go right now, and should in the leagues I haven't yet. But for the right matchups, I'll pick them right back up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like I'm not. I think a lot of these guys are being stashed on your bench. They become, I think, Paul Sport coined the term, the team streamers, right? The guys that you're willing to put on your bench and then put them back into your starting rotation the following week or the week after, when they finally do get that 2-step, or they finally do get that clear. But then they become another stash. Like, they just become another piece that handcuffs you and doesn't allow you to be more nimble and a little bit be more versatile when it comes to picking and choosing who that stash is going to be, or who that backup bench piece is going to be. As you mentioned earlier, you get to a point where you want to make sure that you have coverage in your lineup. These are pitchers. Now, obviously, you can't throw your pitchers in that second base when their guy goes down over the weekend. And so, especially in your 12-teamers, I'm just saying, I feel a little bit more confident holding on to more hitters at this point in the season, because I can pick up the Lance Lynns of the world in the good matchups, because there are more of them throughout the course of the season, especially your 12-teamers as time moves on.
Yeah, absolutely. I asked Scott Jinstad and Jeff Erickson about this a few weeks back on their Sunday night Fab recap show. I asked them how many pitchers they keep on their bench going into Monday, right? When you're planning your Fab.
Sure.
And it's one. It's one. You have your starters, you have your closers. You need one backup in case something unforeseen happens on Monday morning, because once Monday is Tuesday at the latest, those guys are set in your lineup for the week. Friday, we can make changes with the hitters. So one backup pitcher, and
And
sure, you can have a guy stashed. I have Devin Williams stashed everywhere, right? You can have a guy stashed. I'm not counting him, but one backup to get in my lineup if I need to Monday morning. Everybody else is a hitter for the weekend.
that very well could be very different at the beginning of the season, right? And it probably should,
Absolutely.
because
Right. When you're drafted to figure out who those team streamers are
exactly,
going to be.
yeah.
Right. That's it.
All right, so the last group here is, I got 2 guys in here. I have the question for you, and this question made maybe a little bit more sense. No, it made more sense maybe 7 hours ago, before notes on Garrett Crochet came out. So the question is, and then I'll tell you the players in a second. Question is, whose innings are you worried about more? And push comes to shove, who are you dropping first from these 2 guys? And they're 2 of the best pitchers in baseball this season. Garrett Crochet, obviously both these guys 100% rostered, and Tyler Glasnow. Now, obviously, Glasnow is on the IL currently with what is listed as lower back tightness. Very well could just be a case of Dodgeritis, as we talked about. And Garrett Crochet has literally been announced by Sox manager Pedro Grifol, said that Crochet will be on an innings and pitch count tonight in tonight's start on Friday. And out of the break, he will be the fifth starter used. So this goes to our point earlier that you don't know how teams are going to throw out their rotations after the All-Star break. It's going to give Crochet 10 days of rest, assuming that maybe he, I would assume he gets into the All-Star game. But do we count those innings? Probably not. It's no more than like a bullpen session. So are you more worried about Crochet's innings limit or Glasnow's manipulation of innings, because they're both gonna skyrocket past their career high in innings, and with their recent histories, both for Crochet obviously for role related and Glasnow for injury related reasons. Which one of these guys would you be, if you're rostering them both? Who do you think you'll be more out to drop with concerns about actually what they actually can produce for you that in the last 6 weeks of the season?
It'll be Crochet, assuming health for both pitchers. And like we talked before the show, I agree with what you just alluded to. I think Tyler Glasnow is on the IL with Dodgeritis. And they need to do that. They do need to monitor his innings, but they need him. And he is their number one. He's their number one when Yamamoto comes back. He's the number one if and when Kershaw comes back. He's their number one. They need him. The White Sox aren't going anywhere. We expected this with Crochet. We probably expected to start seeing this sooner. So for me, Crochet is the guy that I would not be surprised if he completely gets shut down at some point. They haven't done that yet. And until that, you're riding with what he's giving you, absolutely. But I expect we may see another, Glasnow get skipped a start here or there because they're preserving him for that postseason. But the Dodgers need Glasnow, and the White Sox, they need everybody, which means they don't need anybody at this point, right? So, I fully expect that. I don't expect to see Crochet pitch in September. Let's put it that way.
He's got the added wrinkle with Crochet being, quote, on the trade block as well. Like whether or not that actually comes to fruition, we'll find out in a couple of weeks. But if he's pitching on a contender, yeah, he'll probably be pitching in September, unless he gets traded to a team that's completely, running away with their respective playoff spot. But if he's with the White Sox, yeah, I agree with you. Like if he makes it past the trade deadline still wearing a White Sox uniform, then yeah, I would expect to see a whole lot more innings manipulation. And they're being forthright about it already. You know what I mean? They're flat out saying their innings he's on a pitch count and he will be the fifth starter out of the break. So, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no gray area. It's like, yeah, we're being pretty clear about what we're doing here. This is how it's going to work. All right. Well, I thought that was an interesting topic to consider at this point in the season. Obviously, with the All-Star break coming up, got a lot of decisions to make every single week. But overall, glad to kind of shine a light on a couple of different players that you might not even been realizing that you were holding on to, and you just start realizing, am I holding on to them based on name value alone, or is it the situation specifically at hand that we have to take into consideration, especially with the Max Muncies of the world and the Jordan Montgomerys and what have you as well. But we got to get into our actual recommendations, and we will get to that right after this quick break. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening at home and watching at home. Obviously, we're waiting for Kevin to come back, and we'll get right to it. Thank you so much. And what do I got going on here? Are you back? Kevin, you good? Okay. All right, we are back. Of course, you're still listening to On the Wire. Let's get right into actual recommendations that we can, chip away at each one of the main categories in your roto leagues. Kevin, start me off with some power that might still be available. Lucas and I had some trouble. We have the obvious low-hanging fruit, James Wood, out there. But tell me that there are more names out there that are worth paying attention to if I need some home runs or some RBIs. Muted. You're muted.
Yeah, actually have a couple of names here, Adam. More than a couple. I was a little surprised. And at first, I was having an issue. I was finding a couple of 12-team names, but I got some 15s as well. But for the 12s, 100% rostered in main events, but only 52% in online championships. Michael Conforto. And Michael Conforto is hitting like 173 since he came back from his IL stint in early June. However, for the second half of that, the past 3 weeks, he's slashing 277, 364, 596, 10.9% walk rate, under 22% strikeout rate, almost a 20% barrel rate. 10 of his 13 hits have gone for extra bases, 7 doubles, a triple, 2 home runs, 15 RBI in a couple of weeks. Perfect for this category in the 12-team leagues where he's available. Michael Conforto, once again. San Francisco is at Colorado for their 3 games this coming week. And then they have an 8-game week, 4 at the Los Angeles Dodgers, which is one of the best home run hitting parks in baseball, actually the best this season so far, according to StatCast, I believe. And then 4 versus Colorado. Now they'll be back home versus Colorado, but we're not worried about Colorado pitching either. So in those 48% of 12-team leagues where Michael Conforto is available, he would be a top priority for me. Similarly, Rowdy Tellez, 98% rostered in main events, but only 51% in the online championships. 6 of his 8 home runs on the season have come in the past couple of weeks, 2+ weeks, like 15, 16 days, 50 plate appearances, 6 home runs. 362, 400, 766 slash line over those 50 plate appearances, 12 runs and 12 RBI. Couple of guys for deeper leagues. Randall Grichuk. Now, Randall Grichuk doesn't play a whole lot. Short side platoon guy. But this is going to work out for the next 2 weekends. We know a lot can change in what we're projecting for pitching matchups over the next couple of weeks due to the All-Star break, but it really appears that both of the next 2 weekends, they will face left-handed starting pitching 2 out of the 3 games over the weekend. So Randall Grichuk in deeper leagues, he's 2% rostered in main events, 0% in online championships. But in those deeper leagues, I would have interest for the next couple of weekends in Randall Grichuk. And then the guy we left out of the notes, just so we could bring him up here, Reese Hines. It is really tough to, and I agree with Casey Bubba and Ryan Bloomfield. He's gonna be overpriced this weekend for the majestic home runs he has hit, including a grand slam as we're recording on Friday for his third home run in about 5 days since being called up. Well, yes, this is the 5th day since he was called up. 3 home runs, including a grand slam tonight. But a 40% strikeout rate at AAA is going to catch up with you. This is something I agree with both Bubba and Ryan. He's going to be overpriced. I'll put my bids in because it may take a couple of weeks for the other teams to look and say, okay, here's his holes, and we're gonna capitalize on this. But until then, he is hitting absolute bombs. He's going to be available almost anywhere. He wasn't called up till Monday.
Another one of those full week of viewing pleasure. And to your point, they have been there has been a lot of viewing to have some pleasure in, because those have been some fun home runs that we've seen leave the yard off his bat. All right, thank you for all the power. Now tell me that there's some speed out there as well. And it's funny, you got a name on here. I'm sure you'll throw out somebody else, but it's funny. It's funny to watch my daily moves league and some of these guys, like the Reese Hines, like the guy you're about to mention, get picked up throughout the course of the week. And it's like I see their rostership percentage go up incrementally throughout the course of the week when they're on these hot streaks, when they're continuing to produce or be put into situations in regular situations on their respective teams. And then to see them such low percentage in your weekly leagues in an NFBC format, and have that change so drastically all at once. It's almost like it's just too bad. Like you mentioned, Reese Hines is going to be expensive because we've had a whole week to watch what he's doing. But talk to me about the speed options here and whether or not we should actually, whether or not their rostership percentage is going up for a good reason, bad reason, or something we should be taking note of.
Well, I think Max Schumann for the Oakland Athletics, I think his rostership percentage will go up even in 12-team leagues this week, where he's only, I believe, 7% rostered right now. He's only at 28% rostered in main events, but he is the everyday shortstop for the Oakland Athletics. And 5 of his 9 stolen bases have come in the last 2 weeks. They're turning him loose. I have made the comment multiple times this season. I'm not interested in the number 9 hitter for the Oakland Athletics. And I may have made that comment when Schumann himself was brought up a few weeks ago when he came up and joined the team. In fact, I'm almost certain that was a comment that I made. However, the one category where I'm not so worried about plate appearances, I'm just worried about in limited plate appearances, can he get on base? And if he's not in a starting lineup, will he be used as a pinch runner late in games? Is our speed category everyday shortstop with a 336 OBP. That's what we're looking at. His OBPs were consistently around 400 in the minor leagues. So he gets on base. Even though he's the 9 hitter for the Oakland Athletics, he gets on base. And recently, when he gets on base, he's had a green light. So I think this is a nice add, and especially the 15-team leagues where he's available in almost 3/4 of them, for anybody that could use a handful of stolen bases, not just this coming week, but maybe going forward, at least for a while. 244 batting average doesn't hurt us for a guy giving us the stolen bases, and he is scoring runs. So almost a 3-category player here. And the home runs aren't zero. He's got 5 on the year in 71 games.
Yeah, and this being the everyday shortstop, as Lucas pointed out last week, is the position that most teams do not try to platoon, and he's not doing anything to kind of force their hands into any kind of platoon situation either. So that everyday
if anything, he's doing things that may move him up in the lineup.
Right, exactly. Yeah. He's got the profile though where you don't just move him up from 9th to 7th to 6th.
He's got to go to 1.
You either go to 2, you're either at 1, 2, or 9. There's
yes. Let's make this happen.
There we go.
Speak it into existence.
All right. Well, we got a good speed option there. Guy who's playing every single day, and obviously on a team that's willing to let him do whatever he really wants on the base pass at this point. Let's look at some guys who might have some opportunity after the All-Star break hits. Obviously, not a whole lot of schedule notes to make here, though it is interesting to see that there are 2 teams that have that first day off on Friday. Minnesota and Milwaukee apparently, made a deal where they get the extra day off out of the break.
Yeah, the 2-day interleague series, so they have to take a Friday off. Yeah.
It just happens to be the Friday after they already had 4 days off. So everybody else has their 3 games over the weekend. Minnesota and Milwaukee just have the 2. Colorado is home against San Francisco. They will be home the following Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday against my Red Sox as well. So they'll be home for a good 6 straight days. Cincinnati will be away at Washington. So, not that bad of a ballpark a hitter's favorable ballpark to move away from Cincinnati too. So something just to, take note of there. So with all that in mind, and then anything else, especially coming out of the All-Star break, Kevin, are there any names out there that could take advantage of the short weekends or maybe the week after?
Yep. The right-handed hitting San Francisco Giants, right? They're at Colorado for 3 games. It appears, again, a lot of things can change with pitching alignments over the next week or 2, but it appears they'll only face 1 lefty that weekend in Colorado. So I'm probably not using these guys, Luis Matos, Wilmer Flores, Tyler Fitzgerald, this coming week. But I mentioned earlier, they have an 8-game week the following week. 4 at the Dodgers, great home run ballpark. And then 4 versus, I forget. Was it the Cubs? I think it was the Cubs, but I don't want to say that. No, Colorado again. That's right. 4 back at home versus Colorado. Both of those rotations have 2 left-handed starters in their starting rotation as we know them right now. So I feel there's a really good chance in that 8-game week, 4 against each of those teams, that they'll see both of those left-handed starters from each. We could get 4 left-handed starting pitchers that the Giants face that first full week after the All-Star break. That's why I'm looking at these Giants players who won't be expensive this week. Yes, they're going to Colorado, but they're only facing 1 lefty. I don't think that's enticing enough for people to add them. So we know the Giants like to do this. Matos, Wilmer Flores, and Tyler Fitzgerald all been very streaky this season, very good at times, not worthy of being on our rosters at others. With these left-handed starting pitchers coming up the first full week after the All-Star break, I think it's a great time to use them.
Yeah, that's mentioned. We talk about holiday weekends and all that good stuff too. All-Star break is no different. You're gonna have a lot of people in a lot of your leagues that are thinking, all right, great, short week. I can, take it easy this weekend on Faab, maybe even skip it, what have you. So not to say that, these guys wouldn't be worth it to consider. But I don't think the fact that they're only, playing a short weekend is the only thing keeping their price down, is what I'm saying. You're going to be able to get these guys because you're just not going to have as many bids in general. And so that's, your waterfall bids are a little bit shorter. Maybe your overall bids are a little bit lower. And you can feel a little bit safer in most situations, unless there's some big name or what have you that you're really, really targeting. Great, a lot of hitters to consider this week, and we'll get into some pitcher options right after this. All right, Kevin, get right into it. Wins and Ks are volume stats here for the pitching categories. Obviously, not a whole lot of pitchers going with a short weekend series, but some names out there that we should be considering, assuming we know exactly who's going to be starting in those 2 or 3 games over the weekend. Who's out there for us to consider?
Yeah, Adam, you mentioned earlier in the show, not everybody is going to do a complete reset and come out of the break with their number one, but many, if not most teams are. And we're talking 3 games at most out of each team. The top 3 starters from 30 teams. That's 90 starters. That's only 6 starters per fantasy team in a 15-team fantasy league, right? In 15 teamers, there's probably not somebody available pitching next week that
At least
that
starting.
you can pick up. There's nobody available,
Yep.
right? There may be 1 or 2. One that I came up with limited, JP Sears, talked about him last week that I had dropped him. He had been disappointing recently after performing very well for the first few weeks of the season, but he had the Angels, picked him up. That worked out great. He gets the Angels again coming out of the All-Star break. He's available in about 17% of 15-team leagues. He's available in over 80% of 12-team leagues, and yes, I will use him in 12-team leagues for that matchup. The other one, he's 100% rostered in the 15s, but available in almost half of the 12s, and that's Jose Quintana. He has performed much better than I think people realize. The strikeouts aren't going to be there, but he's been getting the wins and keeping the ratios nice and low for us recently for the New York Mets. So Quintana's another guy I'm looking at. If anybody has somebody in a deeper league that might be available, I would love to see it. We'll keep scouring over the weekend. If anything comes up, we'll tweet it out, of course. But like I said, there aren't enough starting spots for starting pitchers this coming week for to fill our fantasy leagues with starting pitchers this coming week.
Now, this completely contradicts the notes that we talked about earlier about having a whole bunch of hitters for the weekend series. But this is that 1 week of the season where you very well could go ahead and stash up a whole bunch of pitchers so that you can put in a bunch of relievers for this week. If you don't already if you're not confident that a lot of your starters are going to go, because innings are innings, as simple as that. So if you have the flexibility of, maybe stashing 4 or 5 relievers in this Faab period and dropping some of those hitters, and then picking them back up the following Faab period, might be something you want to consider if you are desperate in any kind of innings related categories, like vulturing wins, but mostly strikeouts. And then obviously our next category, the ratios categories as well, because any kind of added benefit there is going to help you. So let's get right into the ratios then. These are guys, we have this running tally, this running list. So give me a name that we can add to the list either this week or maybe even consider moving forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Add this guy to the list of the guys. Excuse me, one moment. Excuse me there. And guys, we talked about earlier in the show, the Jordan Montgomery, Lance Lynn, James Paxton. If we don't like their matchups this week, this is the time to let them go and add some of these relievers, and including a guy that's been pretty high on some prospect lists over the last few years, but he's kind of going under the radar, I feel, for as big of a prospect name he was. Hans Kraus for the Angels has made 9 appearances since he was called up. Just a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago is all. 9 appearances in less than 3 weeks, actually. That's one great thing. He's being used often, and he's only 2% rostered in main events, 0% in 12 teamers. 0.84 ERA, 0.75 WHIP. Doesn't get much better than that for helping our ratios. And Hans Kraus, as I said, pretty big name prospect for a little while. Now finally getting a chance, and he's made 9 appearances, 10 and 2/3 innings pitched, and given up 1 run so far.
Yeah, and he's only get that 1 run came in that 1 outing, as you mentioned. That I'm looking through his game logs, and he's going, at the very least, he's going a full inning in each. He's getting 3 outs in every outing. He's had 1 6-out outing. He's had a 5-out outing, most recently, where he walked away with the win there as well. Not expecting a whole bunch of vultured wins out of any Angels reliever, or starters for that matter. So not exactly the categories I'm looking at, but he's striking out somebody in pretty much every game as well. So at least, that's not going to be something that you're going to lose in this situation. All right. So other other relievers to be looking at now, with a focus on possibly vulturing some saves or moving into a closer role. We are getting obviously closer to that trade deadline. You start stashing those players you think are going to move into that position. Who's the name you're kind of thinking about stashing at this point?
Yeah, there's a few, and the usual suspects, and they're the usual suspects that we've talked about for a couple of seasons now, if not more. Like every trade deadline we've talked about, oh, is Bednar going to be moved, right? In Anaheim, would Estevez be moved? Does that give Luis Garcia a chance, or is Garcia moved too? Then you got to go another level. So this is really, and the guy I wrote down or put on the outline is a guy that could be moved as well as the closer. I have Hunter Harvey here. Many people have been hoping to see Hunter Harvey all season long. There's other people like me that acknowledge Hunter Harvey is a much better pitcher than Finnegan, but Finnegan had the role, so we drafted him, and now we're hoping Finnegan doesn't get traded, but he could. Hunter Harvey's a better pitcher. He could actually get traded, and this wouldn't happen. But if Finnegan, Hunter Harvey's got 1 year of arbitration left. I know that's something big that we look at with the closers. Will they give him a whole lot of opportunities? I feel like for 2 months they can let him. He probably wouldn't even get to double-digit saves for Washington anyway. But it's not necessarily specifically Hunter Harvey. It's like we've talked for the past couple of weeks. If you think a closer is going to get moved and his setup guys are not, then those are the guys to be stashing. If you think a closer is going to get moved and take somebody's job, those are the guys that really, that's when you're really hurting. And oh goodness, I'm going to lose a closer. I'm more worried this time of year about the closers I'm going to lose than I am about finding the ones to gain. That doesn't make much sense because I should be preparing for those I'm going to lose, but we just don't know. We don't know yet. So I'm worried about some I may lose. Guys like Hunter Harvey are guys that I try to stash where I have room, and hopefully anywhere I lose a guy, I at least get somebody back.
Yeah, it's hard to prepare for that because it's like, all right, well, who do you drop for the guy you want to stash? Oh, it's probably the guy you think you're going to lose, and then
he doesn't get traded, and you
don't lose him. Yeah,
really
yeah. Unfortunately, so like Trevor Miguel, obviously in Milwaukee, somebody I'm really keeping an eye. Like he's going to be useful regardless, even if Williams comes back and takes over the role. So maybe it's not somebody I want to drop anyway. But you only have so many of those roster spots where you could just hold on to a guy anyway. Chad Green, somebody we talked about last week, in that situation. Obviously, anything.
Uncle Ted says Holderman, Colin Holderman. That's a good one.
Yeah. Holderman, you can hold Holderman. There we go. I mean, I'm sure the first time anybody has ever said that before. Anyway, so just situations you obviously have to be a little bit fluid, but you also have to act when you can. When you have the ability to act, you should move on that ability, because somebody else, if you don't, somebody else will. All right, Kevin, it's my favorite section here, the wild card section, we are obviously getting closer and closer to a point of the season where the wild card section means almost nothing, because it could really mean anything. So who is out there that is still available, if you have the flexibility that you might be throwing out there?
Well, we talked about him already, but for lack of a better spot to put him on the outline, I did have Xander Bogaerts here. He's only available in 11% of 12 team leagues, so that's not great. The guy I wanted to put here, and I wanted to put here because it is your favorite category, was Tristan Casas. But in
Mm,
spite of the couple of setbacks and it taken a little longer, I think, than some of us were hoping for this IL stint, he's still 100% rostered in mains and 98% rostered in online championships. That's how good he was and how great the breakout looked like it was coming prior to the injury. I was shocked at that higher rostership percentages. A couple of other guys I've been looking at, and it's more the injured guys. I've talked about this guy multiple times all season long. Devin Williams, he is actually on rehab assignment now. He began it on Saturday. So I've been talking about him for a few weeks, and now it looks fairly imminent that we're going to get Devin Williams back. I'm looking at guys like Alex Kirilloff. I know every time he comes back, he gets injured again. And
sure.
his wrists have never really been healthy enough, even when he is playing, for him to do what we have expected to see from him ever since he came up. But he is somebody that I'm still interested in. I think Kodai Senga, if he's still available, which he's not in very many places because we've been expecting him back relatively soon for a little while. But he had another rehab start on Tuesday. So he's getting close. There's several out there. At this point, I'm looking more at some of the injured guys coming back than prospects because I think we've seen a lot of, if not most of the prospects we will see this season. Of course, there will be more, but we're getting to that point where they're the ones that kind of catch us off guard usually. So I'm concentrating more on the injured players where at least I have some sort of a timeline, hopefully. I know we can't trust them always, but at least some sort of a timeline, as opposed to some of these prospects. If we haven't seen them by now, right? They're probably trying to save that entire extra year. So it's not a Super 2 thing. That's long gone, been gone for a couple weeks. If we haven't seen a prospect yet, they're probably not going to lose rookie eligibility this season. So it'll be another month before we start talking about some of those guys again.
Yeah, I start questioning how much the team cares about the rookie eligibility thing over the year of control, with obviously with how well Paul Skeens has done. Paul Skeens is going to win
Right.
rookie of the year for the Pirates, and they're not going to get anything except lose a year of eligibility, from him doing so well, starting for the NL in the All Star game, and obviously just putting up God,
Yeah.
just he's been
I
very.
would guess their thought is the pitcher's not going to win rookie of the year.
That's my
But
thought. That was
he's blown that away. Right?
yes. And if you get enough votes in rookie of the year, you don't even have to win it. You can come in second, and you can still gain as a player. You get that year of eligibility back. So
Right.
this is a guy that they called up. Far enough after that, probably before Super Two, but after the extra year of control. And the Pirates are probably gonna lose it. And they're not going to get anything back for it. So I wonder if that's going to turn into some kind of cautionary tale from a team, or if they're fine, doesn't matter. We'll
My
just roll.
guess is, even though it's the Pirates and they don't have a history of this, that this is the type of player that they said, you know what, it doesn't matter because we're going to extend him anyway.
We're going to
Right.
try.
The Royals don't usually do that, but they did it with Bobby Witt Jr. Right. There, there's a player comes along and a team has to say, okay, we're not the same team we used to be. We have to do this.
There it is. Yeah. And Skeens is that guy, obviously.
Exactly. He's so fun to watch.
Kevin, great names to consider. Throw out any kind of last second words of wisdom, though, that we can take with us through the All-Star break.
Yeah, you alluded to this. The All-Star break, it's like holidays, maybe even more so, right? I will pull back on my bids a little bit this week and probably still bid too high on players. There will be a lot of leagues where there's only 3 or 4 teams making bids at all. It's not as much of what's going on. It's we get a break. And there's only 3 games this weekend, so I'm not going to hurt my teams very much if I just blow it off this weekend, right? Well, that's a big opportunity for those of us that don't. Huge opportunity. Here's the other thing that I have started doing over just the past couple of weeks. There is so much to look at when we're making our Faab bids, just with our own teams and the player pool and matchups and all of this. But it's to the point now where I'm also looking at the rosters of my opponents who are actively bidding over the past couple of weeks. I know we're still in it, and getting an idea of who they're going to be after as well. It's to the point where if I have an extra roster spot and much more money than some of the other players in my league that are still active, I'll pick up players I think they want just to prevent them from having them if I have that spot. But more so, it's more about the categories and seeing, right, are they looking at rosters, not just the categories? Do they still have all the players that were contributing, right? This is probably horrible because it's as an analogy, but I can't think of another example offhand. But it if I'm not wishing this on anybody, if Eddie De La Cruz would get hurt, what what happens to the guy that has him? Where's he at in the stolen base rankings? He should be first, right? But if he's not, all of a sudden he's going to the bottom and stolen. If he wasn't leading with LA De La Cruz, he's sinking fast, right? So that was a bad example, but it's an extreme to let. That's the kind of things I'm looking for with other. Has he lost players that have been contributing to this category? Do I anticipate them falling? It's not just what I can do. We're to the point where I have to look at what other teams are doing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, but really, when it comes down to it,
It is.
It makes. All right, I'll leave it there. It can be worth it though if it adjusts your moves that you're going to be making. Not only to help you, but actually playing a little defense. Defense wins championships, is what I've been told. All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for episode 172 of On the Wire. You can follow myself on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hasting Kevin, and of course, follow the pod itself at On the Wire Pod. After all that, I am Adam Howe, and on behalf of Kevin Hastings, thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.